Parents, welcome to another episode of The Journey, a podcast intended to educate, equip, and entertain you as we talk about important issues facing our families. PCA is a Christ-centered, biblically based, and family-focused community of committed believers doing life together. We hope the information you hear on this podcast informs and inspires you to be a better parent. Welcome to The Journey.
Hey parents, welcome back to The Journey. This is Dan Panetti. I've got Russ Crosson with me. Russ, welcome.
Hey Dan, thanks for having me.
Yes, my pleasure. And your book, I have a couple different versions of the book. For those who are watching on video, they can see this is the old version, yeah. Right? A life well spent. And the subtitle is The Eternal Rewards of Investing Yourself and your money in your family. But then you came along a little while ago and changed it to Your Life Well Spent. I love the title change, but it's still got the same wonderful wisdom. But why don't you tell us, our parents, just a little bit about kind of your background and the kind of work that you've been doing, and then we'll dive into the wisdom that we found in the book itself.
Well, Dan, I've had the privilege of almost 4.5 decades now of helping Christians be good stewards of all that God has entrusted to them. Purpose of our company, Blue Trust, is to help Christians free up resources to fulfill the Great Commission. And I started doing that. I grew up on a farm in Kansas, moved to Atlanta, Georgia to go to work for this startup company. And what happened was, all through the 80s and into the early 90s, as I met with couples, I began to realize that, balance in life and some of these issues, money was central to all those. And so that's why the book came about. That book's been out 30 years now, Dan. This year.
Wow.
Written originally in 1994, and was really kind of a timeout book to help people realize, hey, I manage my money to have more life, not just more money. And most financial services company, it's all about a bigger pile and just, accumulating and all that. And what I began to realize is, no, it's about using your money to buy time to impact people, first and foremost, your family. And that's, in essence, the gist of Your Life Well Spent is, a life well spent earns and uses money to buy time to impact people, first and foremost your family, and secondarily others. It's a life that focuses on the eternal in the realm of the temporal. So don't get to the end of your life and have any regrets. And so, Dan, I've had the privilege now, like I said, 4.5 decades of helping people think about money correctly. I'm a former math teacher, and now I just get to teach people how to think about money.
Yeah, I love it. Now, you make a huge comparison, if I could, and I hate to summarize the book because there's so many really great gold nuggets in there. But what you said was kind of the difference between looking at influencing your posterity, right? The generations to come behind you, your children and future generations, versus your prosperity, and just kind of how people evaluate, right? And I would say the American dream really is built on the concept of how much stuff that you have, right? You want to, the house with the white picket fence, the nice car, the nice neighborhood, your kids go to the right school. But your book really kind of challenges that concept and says, hey, there's more to life. And I think more from a biblical perspective than just the stuff that you have. And it really is the people that you're influencing. And I think that's a huge kind of shift. And I think when you read it, I'll say this, when you read it, it's like, well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think I know that. But then when you look at your life and the way that you spend your time and your money, I think your book really challenges people to say, hey, I know it's true, but are you actually doing it? Is that what you found?
Yes. And Dan, like I said, I work with people who have a lot of financial capital, a lot of wealth, and we do estate planning. Our company does estate planning and these things. And I'd have people in my office with tears streaming down their face as they couldn't leave their financial capital to their family because they had lost their family. And so that's why we talk about spiritual and social capital in addition to financial capital. And so if you don't build spiritual and social capital into those that come after you, you may not even be able to leave them your financial capital. So what a travesty, right? That you've gotten out of balance to build this financial capital house, but no foundation. And so the idea of the book was, hey, everybody, time out. Let's kind of build spiritual and social capital as we go along. So if God does bless me with financial capital, I at least have the opportunity then to leave it to my kids. And so that's really how that came about, Dan, was too many people in my office, big net worth, big financial capital, 10, 20, $30 million net worth. And And it was just sad hearing some of the stories. So this is really kind of a timeout book. And so I like to say, if you're older, and just start where you are. If you're younger and you have kids, maybe you can grasp this principle and live a life well spent as you go along and not have any regrets at the end.
Yeah, well, let's talk to those young parents. Let's start with them. You're a young parent, newly married, got a couple little kids. They're just starting off here at PCA. What's the best advice that you could give them, right? Just kind of from that outlook in terms of their finances and how to use them from a biblical perspective.
Well, the first thing is I'd help them think right. And it isn't interesting. You start your career, you start your family, you start your business, and they both require the most time at the same time. And when you finally get the big house and have the money, you don't need it. And when you needed it, you didn't have it. So the best advice I can give a young couple is, hey, plan to work your entire lifetime. Don't put this arbitrary retirement end out there, think about that too. You start your business, you start your career, and you're in a hurry to quit. So don't get that retirement thing out of your mind, right? That also puts stress on young couples. They're trying to, Julie and I've met with so many couples, and they're trying to fund retirement. They're trying to fund education. You can't do it all. Okay. So prioritize the idea of investing in your family, enjoying the trip, going a little slower. Obviously, I encourage people to live on one income if they can, and that gives them options, especially when you just get married, save that second income and put cement in the basement and get off on a good footing, good trajectory. But the most important thing is don't be in a hurry to quit, and realize and guess what? Your kids don't care where they live. They just care if mom and dad are there.
Yeah.
Joe and I went to Africa in 1981, and they don't have starter huts in Africa. They have shelter, right? In this country, we have these starter homes. We're going to get a bigger home. Isn't it interesting? You finally get the really big home and nobody's in it. So just don't buy that lie of the world that, my possessions and all that are what make me worth something. And enjoy the trip, live in the smaller house a little longer, drive the older car a little longer. All those kind of things can help you do things a little different. Julie and I carried our sofa table into the dining room for 3 years while we were saving for our dining room table.
Yeah. You make do with what you got, right? One of the things right. There's several great lines in the book. I don't want to, specifically pull out, a line because there's so many things you can talk about. But especially for people who are looking to change jobs, you have a line in here in chapter 6 that says, only change vocations to better fulfill your purpose and maximize your time flexibility, not to make more money. And I think that's kind of at the core of what you're trying to help parents understand, right? If you're pursuing money and you're wanting more money, right? The question is always, well, what are you doing with the more money? Is the more money giving you more time with your family, or is it just giving you bigger stuff? Because if it's not giving you more time with your family and your priorities are God, family, work, right? If work is not helping you with the two priorities ahead of it, then you're not doing it right. And so I love that concept, because I do see so many people, kind of in that 30 to 40-year-old range where they're making job changes and they're shifting. It seems like they're getting a better title and they're getting more responsibility and they're getting, pulled even further away and they're traveling even more. And as you said, right, that's the time when your kids are young and they really need you to be home. So how do you figure out how to balance those things? How do you figure out what to add to the plate?
Well, I have a chapter in there on time replacement, and you don't add things unless you can take something out. And I think, Dan, what we're talking about here is, how do I invest my money to buy time? Well, let's take, for example, if I'm a doctor or professional, maybe I cut back to 4 days a week rather than 5 because I've managed my money so I can live on 4 days of income. I don't have to have the 5th day of income. Or maybe I can hire some house help if I got young kids, and during the holiday season especially, to take some stress off my spouse. I mean, this is a different paradigm, but it all starts with spending less than you make and not getting your financial, getting out ahead of your skis financially. Remember, I said you manage your money to have more life. So the most important thing you can do is make sure you spend less than you make, do that for a long time, and buy yourself options. Some people don't have the option but to take the new job and make more money because they've got a bigger house, they got a bigger mortgage, they've got 2 new cars on with debt. And so that's why just do this. It's not easy to do, but it's not complicated. Okay.
Yep.
Spend less than you make and do that for a long time. And remember what I said, that bigger house, your kids don't care. You care. You're trying to impress a limited number of people. I have a principle in the book that I love. It still encourages me today, called Principle of Limited Sphere. At the end of the day, how many people will know where you live and what you drive? It's a limited number of people.
Yeah.
But if you invest your money in what God's doing around the world, you invest in your family, you're going to impact an unlimited sphere of people. So I hate to tell you, but nobody cares where you live and nobody cares what you drive. I mean, a handful of people. So why would I get out of balance to get these things to impress a limited number of people when I can use my money in a different way to hopefully invest in my kids, invest in my grandkids, and leave a legacy? That's what we talk about. That's the posterity word you mentioned.
Yeah.
I didn't call the book Prosperity versus Posterity because everybody thinks posterity is your rear end. Okay, so
Yeah, that would not have been a good title.
I like this title way better, even though I did think about calling it Posterity versus Prosperity. But anyway, I just think it's helped me. Like I said, I let the principle of limited sphere still encourage me when I get discontent. Now, I don't know what it's like there where you live, but in North Atlanta here, there's all these new farmhouses and new houses, and you can drive around and it's easy to get discontent. I mean, I can drive around and then I come back to my 65-year-old little ranch house and I think, it's okay because nobody really cares. Very few people know where I live. So why would I get out ahead of my skis and go buy this big place to impress who?
Yeah. Well, one of the things too, in terms of the decisions that you make, you talk in your book about training our children, right? Because here's the deal, they're watching us and you talk about how to train your children to be stewards, not consumers. And I think that's the reality is if we're not stewards and we're consumers as adults, then our kids are just going to pick up on that, right? If we want more, it's hard to look at our kids and say, hey, right, you guys need to be good stewards of your time, your talents, and your treasures as well. If we're not doing that and modeling that for them.
Yeah, we want our kids to be content and productive, not consumptive, because then they can do whatever God's called them to do. Maybe they're called to be a missionary. Maybe they're called to be a teacher. Maybe they're called to be a butcher at the local supermarket. Who knows? But if they've observed you living within your income, not getting ahead of your skis, learning to be content, doing without, modeling trade-offs, then they're going to be free to do what God's called them to do. And that's what we don't want them to pursue vocations just to try to make money, because that's what you model for them. We want them to do what God's called them to do. And they're watching you and they're going to pick that up from you. And they see you wrestling with, hey, mom and dad, why don't we have a new car? Or why don't we have that dining room table, yet, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now you do mention in here that your children's first 10 years are the most critical, just in terms of from a parenting perspective. I mean, so you've parented, I've parented those younger kids. And I think that's one of the things that is difficult to really understand of how critical those younger ages are, especially when you're parenting and you're around those little kids and it just seems like, at the beginning part, you're just changing diapers and they're just learning how to walk. But it's fascinating to realize that really is how God has programmed kids to be absorbing so much of their environment, that if you're not in that environment when they're younger, when they get older and you want to have those conversations and they're 16 and they're 20 and they're 25, right? It really is, right? They have the conversations with the people who have been in their life in the first 10 years. And I think sometimes as a parent, you miss that, right? You miss that reality because the kids aren't as communicative, right? They're not asking you questions all the time, right? They're just being little kids and they need that time to grow up and to play and to learn, right? But the people that are in that environment when they're younger and they learn to connect with and they learn to trust are the people that they're going to have the conversations when they're 16, right? And now that you're ready to sit down with them, as you said, right? If you don't have that relationship, right, it's very difficult to build a relationship with a teenager or a 20-year-old that hasn't been built before.
Well, Dan, you're exactly right. You're not only building a relationship as you're spending time with them when they're young, but you're helping them learn to be disciplined. You can't discipline in a hurry.
Yeah.
And you can't see the will and you can't see them needing some direction unless you're there. It's a travesty, I think, when both parents are working outside the home and they come home at 5 or 6 or 7 o'clock and they're tired and their 2-year-old's acting up and throwing a tantrum. Well, you haven't been there. And, it's interesting to me, why would I let somebody get an $18 an hour raise my kids, raise my posterity? I'd like to say to people, what's so hard about going to a vomit-free office and drinking hot coffee? That's easy. Anybody can do that.
Yeah.
But being at home and spending that time, and it's hard. It is hard. It's we just got through Mother's Day, it was yesterday, right? And there's nothing harder than being a mom. And I know sometimes they're stay-home dads, but the point is that is hard. It's just easier to go to a vocation. And guess what? You leave your vocation, they'll replace you in 2 weeks, and they won't even remember you. But you're indispensable in your child's life.
I'm
so glad Julie.
It's a good reminder.
I'm so glad Julie sat in the sandbox and made my boys get along. Right? I mean, she was there refereeing, and so it's just interesting. But it all comes back to managing your money in such a way that you have those options.
Right.
So Julie and I decided early on that we were going to live on one income, and we both had incomes when we first started. But once we started a family, we said, okay, we'd really like her to have the option to stay home. And so we were glad we put in place the financial disciplines to make that possible. And we don't have any regrets. Remember, I said a life well spent lives with a focus on eternity in the realm of the temporal. So don't get to the end of your life having any regrets.
Amen. Well, last word I want you to give is to the grandparents, because we're really starting to minister to and reach out to our grandparents. And so, we have a lot of grandparents who listen to the podcast. And what would be the advice that you'd want to give to them? You've already told them, hey, the whole idea of retiring, so that you can, run down to Florida and move into a community where everybody takes care of you. That seems like it's the American dream, but I don't see it from a biblical perspective. I always think that, when you start getting the gray hairs is when that crown of wisdom is there. And it really needs to be something that you begin to invest back into your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids even, so not being around them and not having that connection and that relationship is going to be really difficult, to be able to speak life and truth into them. So what advice would you give to our grandparents?
Well, I would say, hopefully you have time now in your life to invest in those grandkids, spend time with them and do things. We've done things like cousin camp where we bring all the grandkids together and do things. But I would also say that if you have the financial wherewithal, maybe use some of that money you have to invest in your kids and grandkids now. Maybe a marriage retreat for your kids and their spouse, or maybe paying for a private school, or maybe, you fill in the blank, but your kids and grandkids could maybe benefit from some of your financial capital now rather than just getting it through the estate later. And I think that's important to think about. If God's blessed you, what do I do with this now? How can I use it to invest? I pay for book reports for my kids, and if they read the right books, I give them money. So I just think you spending time with your grandkids is important, but you also thinking about maybe how to use your money differently now when they can use it. Maybe you let that daughter-in-law or that son-in-law stay home because you've helped. They don't need the second income because you're helping out in some way. So I just think, Dan, it's just thinking about these things and thinking about them differently than just building a bigger pile. That's the punchline. Yeah.
Well, I want parents to read your book. And so, we're going to definitely make it available, but you are available as a resource for parents. And just because you're in Atlanta doesn't mean you can't take clients from, Dallas, Texas. So we'll make sure that we put your contact information in there. And if parents and grandparents want to reach out to you and take some of that 40 years of wisdom of you doing some financial advising for people from a biblical perspective of really helping people, not just, as you said, not just build up a big pile of money, but really leave an impact. Right. And I think, I go back to Genesis 26:25, where, it talks about Isaac, who was, building altars, pitching tents, and digging wells. And the building altars, right? That's the important part. The pitching tents, as you mentioned, nobody cares about your house and your car, right? A very limited circle of people look at the pitch or the tent that you're pitching. So we spend so much time and energy focusing on our tents, and the Bible spends so much time and energy focusing on our altars. But then the whole idea of digging those wells, leaving a legacy, right? You don't want it just to be there after you're gone, but what can you do while you're still here, right? What are the investments you can make in your kids and your grandkids while you're still alive, as opposed to just leaving them, a pile of money at the end, right? Use that money to influence their lives. So Russ, I love the book. I've read it a couple times. I've given it away. I think probably the second most book I've ever given away. So I've probably given away 20 to 30 copies of your book over the years. So thanks for writing it. Thanks for updating it. And thanks for the work that you've done to really help challenge people to think about their finances, right? A really important decision, how you spend your money, because it shows where your heart is and what your, priorities are. So really, really valuable book. So appreciate you taking some time to share with our parents about these things.
Well, Dan, thanks for having me. And like I said, a life well spent is life that earns and uses money to buy time. That's what you're talking about. And we do have offices all over the country. We're happy to visit with people and help them look at their money in different perspectives. So thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for investing the time to listen to this episode of The Journey. Please take a minute to share with friends and family who will also benefit from this valuable resource. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast app. It is truly our blessing and honor to walk with you on The Journey.